Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the State Water Resources Control Board's Drinking Water and Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program Fee Stakeholder Meeting. My name is David Ceccarelli, and I am the Chief of the Fee and Revenue Branch. I will be facilitating this meeting alongside help with the lead manager in the Fee and Revenue Branch, Glenn Osterhage. Complying with COVID-19 emergency safety guidelines, today's meeting is being held remotely via webcast and Zoom. The meeting handout was sent out last week on July 30th. This handout was sent out through the Water Board's fee regulation library list, along with instructions on how to participate through the Zoom platform. The handout is also posted on the Water Board's fee webpage. Individuals attending via Zoom will have the opportunity to ask questions or provide comments during the open discussion part of our meeting. Please use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. If you're joining us through the webcast, you can also submit a comment or ask a question by emailing the email on the screen or on the agenda, which is das-drinkingwaterfees@waterboards.ca.gov. Today, we have many fee branch staff working behind the scenes to ensure that you experience as few participation bumps as possible. If any time throughout the event you find that you are having technical difficulties, please email the email on the agenda. Again, das-drinkingwaterfees@waterboards.ca.gov. Again, we thank you for joining us virtually today. We thank you for your patience as we move to this 100% virtual meeting space. We're doing our best to ensure everyone can participate in an effective way. So let's go over just a few meeting guidelines. One, remember to use the handouts that were sent to you via email. If you don't have the handouts, don't worry. We'll be sharing the information on the screen today, and then you can request a copy of the documents after the meeting. Remember, if any technical difficulties come up, please email us. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking. And again, remember, you can submit comments or questions throughout the event by emailing us, and we'll have staff that'll be monitoring those emails. I also want to state that there may be a delay in the broadcast. So at times, staff will pause so the listeners can catch up. Before I review today's agenda, again, I wanted to just mention and highlight that this is the third stakeholder meeting as part of the fiscal year 21-22 fee setting process. We had previous meetings in March and June. These meetings are set up so staff can review and present the budgetary expenditures and the impacts these expenditures have on fees. We also discuss any fee proposals and help answer any questions. In addition, these meetings are for staff to engage with the stakeholders to listen to your concerns and issues. And we bring back what we hear today to our executive management and board members. We are driving to taking a fee structure to the board for consideration and adoption at the September 21st board meeting. And I'll get into just a little bit more details at the end of the meeting about that meeting. And then again, prior to the meeting, to the board meeting from today on, please don't hesitate to contact John, Glenn, or I if there's anything that you'd like to bring up. We'll be more than welcome to meet with you. We could, again, set up Zoom meetings or any type of platform that you'd like to have, and we can kind of discuss some of the issues. I noticed that John Russell's on right now. Before we start the meeting, I'll kind of move it on to him if he has anything he'd like to add at this point.
Thank you, David. I just wanted to say thank you to all of you who are participating in our fee setting process throughout the year. I know this has not been an easy year with the remote work, the pandemic, now the wildfires, and the drought and everything. So thank you for taking your time to help us with this whole process. As David said, one of our primary goals is to make sure that you have the information you need to evaluate the fee increases and then implement the other political or procedural parts of the process when we go to our board. So as David said, if you have additional questions after this meeting or other concerns, or you just want to talk to us, don't hesitate to reach out either by email or phone call to David or Glenn or I, and we'd be happy to meet with you either individually or as a group or whatever it takes to get you the information that you need. And with that, I'll hand it back over to David.
Hey, thank you, John. So let me go over the agenda here. The second item here on the agenda is that we'll be discussing the drinking water budget cost drivers. There are a couple of BCPs, budget change proposals. These budget change proposals were in the May revise, so we had discussed them back in June, but we'll touch on those. We'll talk about the drinking water impact of the proposed fees. And then at that point, we will move into ELAP and we'll talk about those cost drivers. We'll talk about impacts of proposed fees, and then we'll have an open discussion. And then we'll go into next steps, which are basically, again, driving to the board meeting on September 21st. So at this time, what I'll do is I'm going to move it over to Glenn Osterhage, and Glenn is going to start us off on the agenda.
And thank you, David. And as David introduced, I am Glenn Osterhage. I am the branch manager for the Water Board fee programs. Also assisting us today is Pooja Vats, who's our unit manager for our drinking water and ELAP fee funds. And she also is the manager for our site cleanup cost recovery program. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Pooja to go over the cost drivers. And then when she's done with that, I'll take it back and kind of go over some of the proposed or changes that we're looking to go forward with. We're going to start, as David indicated, with the drinking water program. Once we're done with that, then we'll move over to ELAP. Once Pooja and myself are done with the drinking water, we'll open it up for questions, comments, emails for drinking water. And then when we're finished with that, we'll do the exact same process for the ELAP side of the house. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Pooja to go over attachment number 1 for the drinking water program. I'm just looking, it looks like Pooja may have dropped off the platform here. So I will go ahead and jump in and take this slide, and hopefully we'll resolve her technical issues here. So this is the cost drivers. It's the similar format that we produced or went over in the June meeting. The very top box is our summary of what we're calling our fee setting budget. For last year, roughly $28.5 million. The drinking water program, for those that were around last year, we did not change fees last year. Going into what is considered the enacted budget, or what we're also calling now the fee setting budget for 21-22, our expenditure number is now up to $34.6 million. And that difference is just over 6.1 million. Looks like Pooja is back on. So Pooja, are you able to comment here and take over the rest of this attachment? We'll give it a moment here. Okay, so I'll go ahead and continue on as we try to work through some technical difficulties on our end here. So again, for the drinking water, the information here, we're looking at about a 21.5%, 21.6% increase in budgetary expenditures that we're setting fees for. Going on to the second box, these are the cost drivers that equal up to that $6.1 million change on the fee expenditures. Every item on here, with the exception of the pay letter, was presented back in June. So the state operations, the removal of the furloughs, the 2 BCPs that David mentioned, the one for the local primacy return, and the second one for the generically is called the drought package. Both of those were previously discussed in June, and then the pro rata change. So the only new item is the pay letter. This is a negotiation with the unions that's coming in after the budget was adopted. So we're estimating just about $1 million of additional salary expenditures going into this fund. So That's the only change from what we discussed just back in June. And then the bottom box is just our projection of where we're anticipating fees to go over the next couple of years. As indicated with all of the changes of the furloughs going away a year earlier than expected, the pay letter, pro rata, we are projecting roughly a 26.6% increases needed in fees. That's only targeting a 5% reserve. Our goal for this program is to get up to a 10% fund reserve. So we're not going to try and get it all this year. We're going to try to step it up over the next couple of years. Next year, there is a projected increase of just below 10%. And part of that is the drought package. There's going to be a delay in hiring some staff this year and wait until next year to fill some of those positions. So some of that drought packaging is just being delayed 1 year. And then we finally get into our fiscal year 23-24, where we're projecting back to our normal 4 to 5% general increase. At the same time, at that point, meeting our 10% reserve number. So with that, again, the only change on this document is the inclusion of the pay letter expenditures. Next slide, please. So for drinking water, we're anticipating roughly a 26.6% total change. We are not for right now suggesting having equal changes across the board. We are looking to increase the minimum for disadvantaged communities up to $250, and the minimum for the community water systems up to $500. But all the larger systems, right now we're showing an average because the amounts vary obviously by the different sizes of systems, but the average community water system is roughly around 5,000 connections. Their fee, again, this is just an average number, is just under $6,000. That is a 26.4% on average increase. So it's right in line with what we're targeting. And then we show the 5 largest facilities or water systems. Again, those largest 5 average over 300,000 connections. Their fee of going up on average, again, of $144,000 is also a 26.4% increase. And then we go down to the other system fees, the non-transient, non-community water systems, going from 2.2 per person served to 2.78, and then also the minimum going up. The transient non-community water systems going from 880 to 1,112, and then the wholesaler amounts. All of those are in the 26% range as well. So in general, our target was the 26.6% average. Most of these, the way the numbers worked out, are right around 26.4%. So that's what we're looking for currently for the drinking water fees. Just as a reminder, fees were not raised last year. We were anticipating the furloughs being in place for 2 years. So our timetable has kind of moved up 1 additional year, plus the addition of the drought BCP is driving a lot of these changes. So with that, I'm going to ask if David, if you just have any high-level comments before we start fielding questions. I know, Bob, you have your hand up. We'll get you in just a moment, unless David doesn't have any additional comments. Trying to get David's microphone off here. There you go.
Sorry about that. No, I don't have any comments at this point. We'll go ahead and start taking questions.
Okay, so Bob, you're the first one with your hand up.
Good morning. I live in the northern edge of the Delta, so I've got crop dusters and dogs, and sorry about that, but it's the way it works here. 2 things very quickly. In the future, please provide a pro forma explanation for all of us of pro rata, direct, indirect, and foundational. We forget. We're not budget gurus like you guys, and it would be good to re-understand every year where our money is going. Also, and I requested this of Darren Polimas the last time we chatted, some sort of large-scale breakdown of where the money is going would be good. The program, I know you can't answer that, but it would be good to understand. And last and most importantly, on behalf of the cities of Long Beach, Fresno, San Jose, Roseville, Antioch, also the Modesto Irrigation District, South Coast Water District, Kings River, We'd like detail on the water resilience and drought package. It's 7% of the increase, as you know. In the past, most recent drought, this was supported by general fund entirely. And it's kind of concerning that it's being laid off on ratepayers. I know overall the impact is somewhat de minimis, but nonetheless, we'd like to make sure the water board's making an effort to get some of the general fund over the next 3 weeks, and we'd be glad to help out. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Bob. I'm checking to see, I don't see any comment, but we'll check with Stephanie. Have we received any email questions related to drinking water?
No, not at this time.
All right, thanks, Stephanie.
I was just going to add.
Go ahead, David.
I was just going to add for Bob. We will, as we put our stakeholder packages together, we can provide explanations of pro rata and the foundational programs, and we can ensure that we have that on the discussion as we discuss those drivers, because we know those drivers are always impacting the fees, and so we will put that on our list to dos as we put together these stakeholder handouts.
Okay, and as we normally do for most of our programs on the various comments that come up on staff activities, we do direct people, again, for all of our funds, being water quality, water rights, drinking water, to the performance report that is updated yearly with all the different activities at a very high level, number of inspections, reports, permits, so different types of activities that staff are working on, not necessarily to a specific program, but some of the overlying activities that some of the funds go for. Just waiting. I don't see any other hand up yet. So we'll just give it a moment here before we move on. So right now we haven't, not many comments on the drinking water side. Again, what we presented back in June and what we're presenting now is almost identical, with the difference being the inclusion or the addition of the pay letter costs. So not seeing any emails coming in, no hands up. So let's go ahead and transition on the agenda over to ELAP, which is item number 4, and it'll be attachment number 3 will be the cost drivers for the ELAP, or the Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program. So Pooja, I'm going to see if you've got your connectivity issues resolved to go over this slide.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, if you can speak up a little more.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah, so they're somewhat I've resolved them, but I will try to do the best I can here. I'm probably going to defer to you for a lot of it, but hi everyone, good morning. My name is Pooja Vats. I'm the Staff Services Manager 1 for the drinking water unit, and then also for site cleanup. So the main thing that, I think the main thing that I want to speak on is the increase that's coming up for drinking water. And I missed a little bit, Glenn, of what was covered because I was trying to connect, so I don't know what you've covered.
Yeah. As far as the ELAP, we haven't done anything on ELAP. We completed drinking water, and now we're pivoting to ELAP.
Okay, got it. So there's also the increase for ELAP as well. And I am referencing here the exact amount for that. Bear with me. So looks like there's, and correct me if I'm wrong, since I'm still relatively new to the fee unit, it looks like a 13% increase or percentage change for fees. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's what the slide is showing on the screen.
Okay, I'm sorry that I cannot reference it exactly. And so that's what's projected to be put through for ELAP. And some of the cost drivers related to that, the budget cost drivers are, well, we've listed them, but state operations, the removal of furlough salary savings, the pay letter, and then pro rata. And so I think I'm probably going to turn it to David, but since the increase is significant there, or David or Glenn could probably speak to what kind of mitigation factors we can put through the unit to see how that affects our fee payers.
Okay, so very similar to drinking water as it relates to the ELAP program. From what we presented in June, the only change is the inclusion or the addition of the pay letter costs. So for ELAP, it's about $200,000. The other information for state operations, the removal of the furloughs and the pro rata is the same. And then like we had in drinking water, the third box is our projected fees over the next couple of years. Obviously, this year, just under 16% is our target. 13 of that is directly related to the budget changes that are shown. The other part is everyone on the ELAP program knows is we implemented a new fee structure a year ago. It takes a couple of years for things to kind of settle down as we see as the laboratories, as they switched over from, I'm going to use the acronyms, FOT to FOAs. We had to do a lot of estimations as to where different labs would land up. But as we're seeing those true up and we're getting consistent numbers, we're able to validate our revenue forecasts. So we were working on older data from a year ago, setting fees. We now have more current information. So as our expenditures obviously increase, we dial in closer to our revenue forecasts. That's what's driving that 13 to almost 16% change, is just some of the adjustments related to a new funding structure. The good news is after this year, we dropped down within our normal ranges. As with the drinking water program, our target is to have a 10% reserve. So next year, we're projecting just under a 5% increase that gives us a 5% reserve, and then the following year, a 4%. Those that are number hawks like me are going to notice that for 21-22, our fund reserve balance is 0 to help mitigate a large increase a year after a new structure. We are targeting basically having no reserve as we wait to true up our financial database with FisCal. And then we'll carry it over to next year to try to balance things out. So this is an evolving program. Anyone who's dealt with implementing new fee structures, new methodologies, understand it takes 2, 3, 4, 5 years for things to really settle out. We're 1 year into that. So we're making some adjustments now to account for that. So if we can go to the attachment 4, next slide, please. So the impact of all this in looking at the base fees, the FOA tiers, is in general looking roughly about a 15% increase. We are looking right now not to propose any changes for the out-of-state labs, the reciprocity fee, or for the assessment fees. Again, we're going to take a number of years to assess the number of labs from out of state or those that are using ELAP versus the third-party assessment. So we're going to leave those, or at least request those to be left alone. We are looking to increase the base fee higher than the target of 15 or 16%. Again, when we set fees a year ago, there was a lot of assumptions, and programs been able to analyze a little more closely, and it feels it's appropriate to raise that up. Same thing with the 0, excuse me, I said 0 to 10, but it's the 1 to 10 FOA fee going up from 300 to 500. The intent with the agreement last year that to try to keep the fees low for the small labs, the $300 again was just a very low number to begin with, and the $500 by no means covers the costs, but it's more in line with some of the staff activity related to the smaller laboratories. But if you look down just below the table, there's some examples. So although the base fee and the FOA fee for the very small 1 to 10 laboratories looks like they're going up, if they're using the ELAP program for their assessments over a 2-year period, their fee is actually only going up 15% because the assessment fee is not changing. So we kind of weighed that in between the accreditation fee and the assessment fees When you combine those over 2-year average, they're in line. The larger labs, those with 350 plus, slightly higher increase. And there's a couple of other proposed changes that we're looking at: the amendment application fee, as well as the amendment assessment fees. I'm not going to read in the detail on those, but those are some, again, as program analyzes all the changes with the regulations, the costs associated with maintaining that type of work activity, we will look on a year-to-year basis to make changes as needed to support the program. So with that, before we take questions or emails, I'll see if there's anything David wants to add before we open up the table.
No, I think you covered everything, Glenn. Program staff continues to kind of monitor the program and evaluate the level of work. As we mentioned to our board, we evaluate this program every year, and we understand we're not a fee-for-service program, but we do try to set our fees where the work is and evaluating that. And yes, some of the smaller fees are going up, but and we understand it's not fully covering the workload, but it's starting to move us into that area. So we'll, again, continue to monitor it. This is our proposal. And I'll move it back to you, Glenn, and then any comments or questions that we have, we'll start to answer.
All right, thanks, David. So I'm not seeing any hands raised yet. I'll ask Stephanie, have we received any email questions or comments?
No, there's been no emails at this time.
Okay, and I see Jared, back-to-back days. Jared, good to see you. So go ahead and we'll open up for you, Jared.
All right, good morning. Here on the ELAP fees, and I just have to remark, after last year's adoption hearing in May, when cost was a major issue raised, and our concerns with how the economic modeling was performed, to the adoption hearing in July on the fees themselves, and hearing board members remark about how stark the increases were, to come back 1 year later and to see this very small lab fee, FOA increased 67%. That's very steep and very troubling, I think, to a lot of our folks, is what I've been hearing. I don't know if there's any kind of corresponding information available that would attest to how many labs are maintaining accreditation, or how many are, dropping or signaling they're going to not reapply to remain accredited. But there's concerns there because the way the system is matured over the last, 4 decades, if not longer, we have this great network of labs all around the state, in small communities and in large urban populations. And because of this network's existence, you can do all the work that these labs are doing for compliance and regulatory purposes. As these costs go up, the concern is that you're going to lose a lot of those outliers, and you're going to lose that. And so seeing these fees here, it to some degree, it feels like I don't know if bait and switch is the right word, but we already had an increase on the base fee last year. And so to be greeted again this year with another 25% increase, that's pretty staggering for us. And it doesn't really seem to comport with all the indications and messages that we received last year when we went through this process. It seems like the exact opposite. It seems like even further hikes. So I kind of was wondering if you don't mind flipping back to the prior slide. I'm not as versed in the ELAP fees. I know I've spoken to you a few times, Glenn, on the water quality side, but if you could help me understand this, it looks like the budget allocation for last year was 3.8 million, and for this year it's 4.3 million. So to be clear, does that mean ELAP is increasing the cost to run the program, or does that mean something else, that budget allocation?
So I'll jump in first, and then maybe Christine Sotelo or Kate Hilty on the program side can weigh in as far as some of the impacts on the smaller labs. But on this slide here, yes, the cost for this program without adding any additional staffing or PYs is going up about $500,000. The primary drivers, again, are in the second table. The removal of the furloughs. We had anticipated that the furloughs If you're not familiar with that, all state employees had to, be furloughed for 2 days a month. So there was a saving. We were anticipating that being in place for 2 years. So when we set our fees, we were anticipating those costs coming in next year. They came in a year earlier than we anticipated. And then the pay letter, I'm not involved in the union negotiations. I would have imagined if the furloughs had stayed in place, there would be no salary increases as well. So obviously it's a double hit. The furloughs go away, and then there's a negotiate with the unions. So right there is $400,000 of additional costs. And then we talked about pro rata last time through our budget, through Department of Finance and our accounting office. There was some review done, and in short, ELAP has not been paying their proportional share of pro rata for a couple of years. In a way, it's been a cost savings. So again, when we set our fees, we were going off the data we had at that time. It now turns out that ELAP is, in essence, being properly charged their pro rata, so it takes a year to get that caught back up. So all those costs, the program in the background has made a decision to hold one position to not charge this fund. That's it's 210 here, but it's about $200,000 for one staff. So program is trying to maintain costs going into the fund, which is called ELIF. So they're keeping one cost down there, while at the same time, there's 3 different items that are pushing the costs. So with that, I will see if Christine maybe wants to weigh in on a few comments related to any type of programmatic work as it relates to the small facilities or laboratories. I don't know, Christine, there you are, okay. Or maybe not.
Hi, I'm here.
Okay, thanks, Christine.
Yeah. So I did want to pitch it over to Kate Hilty, who can talk about some of the program implementation efforts that we've been making based on the new regulations.
Sure. And before we talk about that, I did want to mention too, good morning, everyone. Hi, Jared. Thanks for your question. I think a big part of what we're seeing and what I'm seeing as a non-fee guru person as well from the programmatic side is that a lot of what's happening is we're having to kind of correct for the way the program was run in, the decades prior, like you mentioned, Jared. And one of the things that was, happened, which was great at the time for labs, but their fees were not increased for 10 years. So that fee was artificially low, and we've been having to make those corrections since coming over to the State Water Board. So, we certainly recognize that the fee increases have been steep in order to make that correction. But I think when it's averaged out, and Glenn or David may be able to give a better number, but I think it averages out to something like 6 or 7% per year if those fee increases would have been spread out during that decade before ELAP came over to the Water Board. So that's a pretty typical fee increase per year based on what I've observed at the Water Board since I've been here. So certainly know that it feels really steep, and I can understand and absolutely empathize with where you are coming from and your stakeholders, Jared. And like Glenn mentioned, on our side, we do recognize this is tough. We want to keep as many labs in as possible, and so that's why we're keeping a position open. That's why we're providing training to the labs for free to help with some of the costs of implementing, the new regulations. That's why we gave folks an extra year to get their third-party assessments and their assessments in place. So, we're making some efforts where we can on our end to kind of meet people in the middle. And but that being said, I understand it's a tough pill to swallow.
It is. I appreciate that information. I feel like in the last few years, the ELAP fees had already been pretty substantial on their increase. And I understand there's a catch up there, but I also feel like I heard from board members saying that they don't want to have to see that steep increase going on the fees. And so it's not as if the last 4 or 5 years hadn't had fee increases. It was maybe earlier years before the program came over. So there's that concern. There was already pretty sharp fee increases over the last few years. We were told the new regulatory regime wouldn't have a lot of new costs associated with it or would maintain status quo. And then here we are with this base fee proposal that's even higher, and then for these small labs, the FOA conversion, that's also pretty high.
Sure.
So,
And I think, a big piece of that is the cost drivers here are not related to the new regulations. These are kind of all out of ELAP's hands completely. So these are set by the state, and we just have to absorb it. It's unfortunate. And in terms of timing, it's not great because it comes right when the regulations are coming, right? So it's kind of hitting folks from more than one angle, but it's unfortunately the reality. I had something else to say, but I can't remember. So I will throw it back to Glenn or David if they have any more information on that.
Yeah, we're going to make Kate a fees guru, whether she wants to or not. So hang in there, Kate. So as she indicated, most of the costs that are going up, we were not anticipating. It was also tough. Our ELAP fees, I call it out of sync with our other fee funds last year. There was a delay as the regulations were delayed. We had to delay the implementation of the new fee structure to be consistent. I don't want to fall on the sword and say we're using old data, but we tried to stay consistent with the data set we were using probably 2 years ago. And that was before, obviously, furloughs, additional costs for the pay letters. And then this, hopefully, it's just a 1 year catch up for pro rata. So some of it is timing. Some of it is just a change. We went from an FOT to an FOA basis. And as Kate mentioned, and David was aware of this because he was the lead as our manager when this program came across, it took a number of years, a number of different fee increases to get this program properly funded to cover what was not done in prior years. So I'm going to pass it off to David because I know you worked significantly on this since it came over to the water boards, and you might have some additional insights to add.
Well, I would just say it's correct what Kate and Glenn has said. When the program came over, we were extremely underfunded, and it did take multiple years for us to continue to play catch up. So that's one part of it. And now that we've put in a new fee structure, and now we're monitoring it with the the number of labs that are in the program, and of course with our number of staff that we have, and the staff are not growing. It's just the cost of the current staff we have. I will say, Jared, I appreciate your comments, and we definitely that's part of this whole engagement process that we'll take those and have our internal discussions about those about the adjustment, especially to the base and to the lower category. And see how we can, if there is a way that we can help restructure. We do know that that 13% change in the budget allocation, we do need to generate that revenue to cover our cost. And so we definitely have to figure out a way to implement that to cover those costs. And so we'll, again, we appreciate what you're saying, Jared, and we'll have these kind of internal conversations as we move forward here.
And just to add to that too, Jared, what I had meant to say was really specifically related to your comment about that lower tier or the smallest tier, which is a concern to you and the folks you represent, is that we had added that tier at the request after working with the stakeholders like you last year when we created this structure, because we do really support the small labs and keeping everyone in. But that tier is about 40% of our population. So we lost a lot of money when we created that year, or that smallest tier. So I think when we came back to the table this time and discussed it, a $200 increase, while it's a large percentage, it's still a relatively low amount of money. And that's kind of why we decided we needed to make up some of that, that some of what we had lost when we said that before. And essentially it was, a trial and error thing, or, we said this is a good starting point, and we think it's a good starting point, and we'll have to make adjustments. So that's kind of, I think, the philosophy behind it. But certainly, like David and Glenn have said, I don't think it's written in stone yet, and we're definitely happy to go back and have continuing conversations about it. But I wanted to provide a little bit of thinking behind it.
Yeah, so to kind of add on to Kate's comment there, this is a work in process. I've done enough in the various programs, majority of in the water quality, but as I work on water rights and drinking water, now ELAP, anytime we make a change in some type of structure, it takes a number of years. On other programs, it may take 4 or 5 years for enrollments to come in. So you start seeing that revenue a few years after the implementation. In this particular case, it's the structure, the regulations have changed. We're committed to review this, as Kate and as Christine would say. We're going to look at this, yearly basis, just to make sure we're staying within our guardrails, if you want to say, use that term, to make sure they're consistent and fair. And as David said, we will take the feedback. We will discuss it with program, with our exec, and then obviously we'll take a recommendation or a couple different options to the board in September, and let the board have their chance to weigh in on what they feel is the appropriate change.
Thanks. A couple last comments, maybe as a point of a clarification. Someone had said we absorb that on staff at State Water Board, and I think that the absorb it. Maybe a small point of delineation there. Also, I think, I don't think it's appropriate to relativize the increase by saying it's only $200, because it's a 60% increase. And I think if our member agencies with their local boards were to propose any kind of increase that was that steep, it couldn't be relativized by, well, it's only going to be $1 per month more on your water bill. It's the fact that it's such a sharp increase, and that really matters at the local level. And I think that same principle has to apply at the state level, because those are kind of the terms we live in our universe with local government. But then just to maybe reiterate or document what I was trying to summarize earlier, as of 2019, when the fees were adopted in September that year for 2019-2020, ELAP's fees had increased by 120% in 5 years. In 2015, the base fee was only $1,000. And now we're looking at a proposal for it to become $3,000. And so it's the same with the field of testing fee now, the FOA. The field of testing fee had gone up the same amount over 5 years. And so I hear you on this one saying, well, it's not the program and its fees increasing per se, it's that we're having to respond to these other external drivers. But I think within the context of the last 5 or 6 years, it's just, insult to injury, I guess, with how steep it is for one more year. And I think on the heels of the adoption of the regulations being adopted and a lot of the conversation we had back then, if there's any relief that could be provided to these smaller labs, it would be very appreciated in terms of how you ultimately land on this. And what I've hear, over and over again from the ELAP community, it's really these small labs that are the most concerned to us here at the local level and the local government level, because as I kind of characterized before, like they're really what provides this great network across the state to get these real-time results at the local level. And we heard anecdotes during the adoption hearing saying, if I don't keep my lab operating and we have a plug of toxicity coming through, well, I'm not going to run a test on that sample, and we might not know for 2 or 3 weeks till we get our results back. And that's far too long. And so having that immediate response is critical for the state and local governments to meet their water quality objectives and their goals and to be in compliance. And so anything that ultimately is going to make it harder for small communities with fixed incomes or fixed rate payer bases that are already overextended because of a bevy of other regulations and other costs that they're having to respond to. This is one spot where if they can get any kind of relief, it would be fantastic to provide them that.
All right, thanks, Chair. Appreciate your comments, and we'll take those internally. David, you were going to say something?
No. I was just going to thank Jared for his comments.
Okay. And thank you, Kate, for jumping in, and Christine for being available. I'm looking to see staff. Stephanie, do we have any email questions?
No, we don't.
And I'm not saying, I'm going to wait a moment to see if anyone else who's on the Zoom will raise their hand. So as David indicated, the purpose, and actually John did in his opening remarks, the purpose of these meetings is so we can get the feedback from the stakeholders or the regulated community and we can use that on our end as the administration side as we deal with the program, as we deal with management and exec, and obviously as we go up to the board members to make sure they're properly briefed on the different issues that are out there. As David indicated, and he'll summarize in our his closing statement, we anticipate going to the board on September 21st. The agenda will come out 10 days prior to that meeting, in which case, submit your comments. Those will be looked at by the board, and we will address those in our presentation at the board meeting. So I'm going to hand it back to David to finalize as we're waiting to see if we have any questions. I don't see any email notes coming up on my screen over here. So we should be good to go, David, for you to finalize up and give your closing remarks. If we can go back to the agenda, please. Thank you.
Well, again, thank everyone. I want to thank everyone for participating today, for all the stakeholders that are online and those that did participate today. I want to thank you. It definitely assists and helps us. Jared, did you have another question there?
I did. I'm sorry to.
Hey, no problem. Well, go ahead, Jared.
I just got a message from one of my members, and they wanted me to ask a question. So I'm just, I'm in your shoes. I'm just the messenger. So the question reads, with the third-party assessments conducting on-site assessment that were typically done by ELAP staff, that will mean additional increase to the laboratory above and beyond the increases being proposed today. Therefore, on-site assessments by ELAP have decreased. Is there any future plans to reduce ELAP staff due to this task reduction? And if not, then what are the justifications of keeping current ELAP staff level or additional staff on, if any? So I don't know if that translates well, or I need to read it again.
Before we have, well, Kate, I see you jumped in. So Kate, if you want to go ahead and maybe tee this off, and then I can jump in also.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question, Jared. I think it's an appropriate one. And again, I think going back to the way ELAP was run before it came to the board, it kind of had a one-track mind. All the folks did in ELAP was assess, that's it. And they didn't even do that on time. So one of the things that we did when we came over, Christine did, and drinking water management, was figure out what we were supposed to be doing, what all of our charges were. And that has included performing enforcement, performing monitoring of laboratories through reviewing their PTs. And so some of the staff that we're assessing before are now performing these other duties that we're required to do, that we're charged with doing in the law. And so that has been a big change for laboratories. And in terms of whether or not we will reduce staff, I don't think I can speak to that, but I certainly know that that would be a conversation that management would have when and if, the time came, but I don't think that's now, at least to my knowledge.
You mentioned assessing the labs. Do you know currently, I think as of a couple of years ago, there was a backlog of about 100. Do you know how far down that's been whittled?
I don't know off the top of my head. I know COVID definitely, we were moving pretty good on that backlog, and then COVID threw a big old wrench into that plan. And so one of the things we did during COVID was perform offsite data assessments for all of the labs on that backlog. It was something like 100, which we kind of think of as like the first piece of the full assessment. So doing as much as we could offsite so that once we have to go on site, it's a smaller or shorter time period that we're in the laboratory. So I don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head, and it's kind of a complicated one because of the pandemic, on top of the new regulations and a change in the way that assessments are conducted. So.
No, I completely appreciate that and understand fully how that could interrupt your operations. So I appreciate the information and filling this last question here. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. I appreciate
it.
Yeah, and thanks, Kate, for jumping in. And again, before David does our final, again, if you have any comments outside of this meeting, don't hesitate to contact myself, David. We'll take those into consideration. So I'll hand it back to David to kind of do our wrap up. We'll still have, if anyone raises their hand, or Stephanie, if we receive any email questions, we'll go ahead and get those before we wrap up. So go ahead, David.
So again, I just want to thank everyone. Thanks everyone for participating, not just for today, but through this whole year, through the whole fee setting process. We all understand it's difficult not to be together in a room and to be through this kind of virtual environment. But we're trying to make the best of it. And again, trying to convey the information that we get from the budget and of course, how those impact the fee payers, and also help, kind of getting to listen to your concerns. And we appreciate all that. And again, we take everything that we hear today, we take that into our consideration of staff's proposals. And we also, again, relay that information and issues and concerns to, again, our board and to our executive management. I also, again, want to thank staff behind the scenes for putting together everything together, the handouts, and then and running the meetings through Zoom and fielding the email questions that are coming in. So I want to thank staff also, and thank Kate and Christine, program staff, to be involved in this process. We appreciate that. So we are driving to, as Glenn mentioned, we are driving to the September 21st board meeting. The agendas will be coming out 10 days prior to that. There are instructions on how to comment on the board agenda. You'll find that information on the board's website. So that, again, there's an opportunity to comment, and we're able to take those comments and read into them and listen to them, and the board members will take those also into consideration. So again, I appreciate everyone's time today. I want everyone to have a good Friday, and we'll be talking soon. So we'll be signing off now. Thank you.